Thank you for tuning into the Devy Devotional Podcast, a monthly show focusing on Devy prospects, strategies, and incoming rookies. Now here's your host.
Welcome into the Devy Devotional. I'm your host, Dynasty Coach A, joined as always by Aaron Wilcox at Aaron Wilcox86 on Twitter. And tonight, it's grudge match time, baby. It's time that we finally stop agreeing on everything and start going after each other. Aaron called me out on a couple players. I'm about to call him out on a few, and we're going to get mean, nasty, dirty. No. We actually just decided it was time to not... just to switch things up a little bit and go a different route and just sit here and go, maybe we don't have to agree on everyone. I think that we both always enjoy each other's, analysis and everything like that. And so sometimes we sit there and just go, hey, I like that. I like that take. Well, tonight's a little different. So we're going to switch it up. But first things first, how are you doing tonight, Aaron?
I'm doing great. And usually we can talk some sense into each other when we're talking through these guys. So what might start as, like you said, a debate type of thing might actually become like a persuasive speech, right?
Exactly.
Let's see how tonight goes. But yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Talking about some guys that we've either disagreed about at some point or currently. So yeah, this will be fun.
It should be, but it's been a couple weeks since we've been on here, and of course Toronto Dave's in the chat with his goofies. But we've missed quite a bit. We missed the college football playoff announcement, and then it not mattering at all. What did you think of this past weekend of college football?
Just wild implications. Alabama going down. That's just it's going to be very interesting to see how this ends up. And I don't have any wild predictions or anything like that. But yeah, very interested. It's cool to see some new teams in there. I mean, yes, Georgia still, right? But the fact that there's a couple of teams that haven't necessarily made it that far in recent years, at least nipping at the heels of some of those big schools, big teams, is exciting. So we should have a good finish the next couple of weeks, just really seeing who emerges. And it's also playoff time in your campus to Canton leagues. So good luck to everybody making the playoffs there. John and I secured first round buys, so we actually don't need to worry about it.
We don't have to do nothing. We don't have to do a damn thing.
I got buys in actually both my leagues, so I'm just gonna sit back and enjoy it this weekend. Don't have to sweat about setting lineups or backups or any of that. So that's good stuff.
It's much needed for me. I have like 5 QBs in my campus league that are all injured. I guess they're not on buys anymore. I think just all of them are injured. And so I need a week just to see who's coming back, who's healthy, all that kind of stuff. Although I was pretty happy that with not very many healthy players last week, I still put up pretty good score and was able to secure that buy. So doing pretty well there. You definitely want to keep up with the Devy Devotional because clearly it's working. It's working in practice. So, we'll have to see what happens. I'm kind of hoping that we don't have to face each other again anytime soon. But then again, there's not too many weeks left. So there's probably a decent chance that we will here pretty soon. Hopefully, one of us can take out Todd at the very least.
Yeah, he's coming on strong for sure. So excited to see how that all pans out.
All right, but we're not here to be nice, especially not to Todd, but also not to you. Let's go ahead and get into the nastiness. First of all, I want to call you out. My boy, Ja'Cory Brooks, you were a big fan. Yeah, I mean, almost as big of a fan as me. Obviously, I ended up drafting him in our campus league, but you were right there with me. And it seems like you're tailing off as of late. And obviously it hasn't been all, rainbows and roses and everything. But I think that we're starting to see progression like weekly. Even in this past week, seeing a good amount of targets and receptions and everything. Now, it hasn't been perfect. It hasn't been maybe exactly what I wanted it to be or obviously what you wanted it to be. But I don't think the Alabama offense has been exactly perfect either, which we see in them not even making it, probably not making it into the playoffs and all that kind of stuff. I I think that the offense is kind of broken, and so it's hard to blame for me to blame Jacory too much. Where, not to put words in your mouth, but it seems like maybe you're kind of starting to notice flaws in his game, and you're saying, oh, like this is why I'm getting lower on him. This is why I'm getting concerns with them. Meanwhile, I'm sitting there looking at it going like, he's getting better, just about every week, or at least since the beginning of the year, where he couldn't even get on the damn field. And, now he's basically the number one wide receiver for a great Alabama offense, or a great Alabama group of players. So I just think when it's all said and done, he's obviously a little raw, a little, new, and the offense isn't quite clicking, or it's not what we would expect from Alabama in general. And so I don't want to hate on him too much. And I think that like every week I'm noticing him, tick up the ranks in the model weekly. But what are you so concerned about with my boy Jacory here?
Yeah, so you laid out well how he's been coming on. He was not seeing the field early in the season, or at least he was in a very minor role initially. And he's definitely earned more and more snaps, that's for sure. 15 targets this last week, which, you gave me that statistic there. I asked him, like, how much did he get targeted? Because I saw some issues there as far as him converting those targets. And he only had 7 receptions. So, I mean, that's, less than a 50% catch rate. And I guess that's part of my concerns is I'm seeing some issues where, yes, he's the number one target for Bryce Young. And typically we'd say targets are good, right? But if he continues struggling to haul them in at a high rate, will he, A, continue to see those targets long term, and B, is the coaching staff going to say, we got to keep putting this guy out there, let's say, as these younger guys develop? Because we have to appreciate that Bama brings in so much talent through the transfer portal, through true freshmen every year. It's like, if we're looking long term for Brooks, targets are a good thing. I'm not going to say that he's a bad player, because bad players don't command 15 targets in games. They just don't. And I just kind of look at his statistics over the season and his receptions market share, so the amount of receptions for the team. He's like 13.8%. His yards market share for the year, 18%. Yards per team pass, it's at 1.46. Dominator rating, sub 20%. It's like, and those are from Campus to Cadden, the website, Campus to Cadden. Those marks are kind of below some other guys, and I thought that was a little bit scary with Brooks. I know you can't completely have faith in those because he started off so slow in such a limited role, right? But guys like Troy Franklin, for me, are passing him up in this class. Guys like Malik Neighbors, who has not blown up or anything, I mean, he outperforms Jacory Brooks in some of these measures. Even Bo Collins, I think, is better in the dominator rating area, though I still have Jacory ahead of him. So Jacory deserves a Bama bump, but if we're talking about raw production, I mean, Kobe Prentice, the true freshman, has more receptions than him. Prentice has not been nearly as efficient or not as good.
Yeah.
But he plays a different role, right? He's just a little slot receiver, and like you said, the offense is not clicking like it normally would. And next year when they have Jalen Milroe or Ty Simpson as quarterback, that's a downgrade from Bryce Young. So is it going to truly get better for Brooks? Maybe as he develops, but I guess those are my concerns that I laid out.
We might have to talk about Milroe, because if it's going to be him, then I'm scared about Brooks too. But I think that, just looking at, like we said, the first few weeks, he had 0 yards, 33 and 29 yards. And then he blew up in week 4 with 6 catches for 117 yards. And then, of course, we know that Bryce Young gets hurt, and once again, we can talk about Milroe here in a little bit, but that passing game was not amazing during those couple of weeks there. And then when did he come back? Did Young come back for the Texas A&M game or the Tennessee game? I can't remember right now.
I'm going to have to go back and look on that one.
Yeah, well, regardless, he had 0 yards for Arkansas, and then he had 44 yards for Texas A&M. And then 79 against Tennessee, 74 against Mississippi State, and then 97 against LSU. So it seems like it's trending in the right direction for the most part. We're seeing, bigger plays, some 7 or 16.9 yards per reception. Like, that's the kind of stuff you want to see. Whereas with the Kobe Prentice, I feel like it was almost like a safety valve for Bryce Young, especially in the beginning of the season, and it didn't really turn into anything. Like they're like 5-yard receptions, 7-yard receptions, and so I'm not hating on Prentice by any means. Once again, targets are a good thing. Not trying to hate on the guy by any means, but we're starting to see like actual like NFL statistics that I look at that like look really good for Brooks that I'm not seeing with the, at least with Prentice. Now, like Isaiah Bond has flashed. I think that he's going to be something in the near future, or at least in the future. And then obviously JoJo Earl, has flashed a little bit as well. And then everyone has kind of forgotten about Jermaine Burton, but like he was brought in to be this stud. Trayshawn Holden started the year. I mean, it's not like there's no one in this wide receiver core. So I get what you're saying. Like they can easily bring in other wide receivers, and I mean he could be replaced, but like he's dealing with 4 and 5-star guys already, so like he's already done his job to get where he's at. So I don't think it's all doom and gloom. The only thing I will argue with your statistics, and I know you got it from a site and everything, but I'm looking at 2.01 for yards per team pass attempt for him. Could be that maybe it wasn't updated from last weekend or this past weekend and stuff like that. So I'm not trying to say they're wrong. It could just be that it's not updated, but that's what I have. And I did update everything from this past weekend.
Nice. Yeah, that could totally be it. I do have to bring up one more point of, like last year, I get it, the offense just does not look the same this year at Bama. And part of it's the offensive line. I do think part of it's the weapons. Like, it's feasible that maybe there just aren't any guys who are going to be elite NFL producers at the next level right now on that Bama wide receiver core. John Mechie, I mean, not that John Mechie was great, right? But last year he had 96 receptions for 1,100 plus yards. And Jameson Williams, I mean, he had 1,500 yards, right? He had 15 touchdowns. Amazing season last year. So it's just nobody's coming close to that this year at Bama.
Yeah.
Ja'Cory Brooks, I mean, I will say that he's probably the best out of that group this year, but does that still make him a good NFL prospect? With the stuff that I was seeing so far, he's got a ways to go. Let's just say that. So that's why I'm pumping the brakes a little bit. He's still firmly within my top 10 wide receivers in the 2024 class. That the top of that class has just really separated itself from maybe guys like Ja'Cory Brooks, right? Marvin Harrison Jr., Emeka Egbuka, they're studs, right? I mean, they're almost surefire type of studs. And Worthy is up there too. I don't know where you have him right now, but I do think that there's quite a bit of a tier break after those guys.
Yeah, I have the Ohio State guys and like kind of their own tier at this point, but Worthy's not that far behind them. I don't have Brooks in that tier with Worthy, but he's like I said, he's moving up each week. So like I don't think it would be insane to think that he would be there soon, because I mean I told you last week that he'd broken in the top 18. Well, now he's broken in the top 12. So, it's like it doesn't seem like it's going to be that much longer before he gets there, assuming that, things stay the same. Now, they just kind of got out of playoff contention and everything. So, like, who knows? Like, are they going to change things up? Are they going to, like, I don't know exactly what they're going to do. Or are they just going to try and, save face and be like, all right, well, we lost 2 games, but we're still going to go get a good bowl game and like that kind of thing. Most likely with somebody like Saban and all that kind of stuff, that's probably just what they're going to do. Go get the best bowl game we can get. Maybe somehow, if like just crazy stuff happens, then they can squeak into the playoff. Like it is Bama. It's not that crazy to think. So I don't think they're going to change too much. And I mean, 15 targets is great. I'm never going to sit there and think that somebody getting 15 targets is a bad thing. I feel like the offensive line is probably the biggest problem here, but I don't really like pay attention to that kind of stuff. I just from what I've seen and like watching a few of their games and everything, just seems like Young's always running for his life, and so I've personally seen Ja'Cory wide open in the middle of the field, but Bryce is over here, and so he can't see him. So he ends up dumping it off for 7 yards to JoJo or Earl or Kobe Prentice or whoever.
Right? Yeah. Brooks is one of those guys where it's like that inconsistency drives me crazy, because like you said, there's those routes where he's open, it looks effortless, and then there's the other ones where he's tripping on himself, He's fallen down. He's sloppy routes. So if he can clean that up, I think that he can be a pretty darn good wide receiver. I just don't know if he's a top end technician at this point. So maybe he's like a Deontay in some ways, where it's like the guy is going to demand targets. He's maybe not going to be the most efficient with them, but at the end of the day, he probably is the best Bama wide receiver there right now, at least. So there's still room for optimism, reason to like him.
Obviously, you deal with more of the film takes and everything and film watching. Is that something you've seen a player before and then they've fixed or they've cleaned up? Like, I mean, or multiple players or just one player in particular that you can think of?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think he's able to clean that up. I think he should be able to. There's some wide receivers, just body type, things like that, where it's very difficult for them to really tweak that. A guy like Treylon Burks, he's not going to become a super elite wide receiver as far as route running goes. He's not going to be an Odell Beckham Jr., or Amari Cooper, or somebody like that. He's not built that way. Ja'Cory Brooks, I think he can refine his game a little bit further. So he can clean it up, but he just doesn't remind me of some of these guys who just naturally have that really, really great ability to stop on a dime, get in and out of their cuts quite seamlessly. So that's a bit of a concern where I think he can clean it up, but he's never going to be one of those guys where he's this elite route runner. And he wasn't a great athlete coming out of high school. He was fine. He was good, but he was never a burner. So that could be something that limits him in the future.
All right, so we're going to have to wait and see on this one, clearly. But, things are trending in the right direction. But speaking of non-elite players, Jalen Milroe. I know he has elite speed, elite athleticism, but, man, I did not like what I saw in those couple of games. And it sounds like maybe you saw something that you liked there, because we talked a little bit about it before we jumped on here, and it seems like you're a little higher on him than I am.
Yeah, and part of it is because we didn't really get to see him a whole lot. So when he came in that Arkansas game, which they won 49-26, he was fine, right? I mean, he was 4 for 9, so he didn't get a lot of work in that game. He had one passing touchdown, 0 interceptions, but he had 91 rushing yards. And then the next week at Texas A&M, which they won, not the best high-volume passing performance that you'd like, but we've already talked about how even Bryce Young has been struggling this year, statistically. So, we know that Jalen Milroe is not going to be as good of a passer, especially in his first year really playing meaningful snaps for Alabama. So 12 for 19, 63% completion rating, 3 passing touchdowns, 1 interception, 81 rushing yards. He's going to put up some numbers on the ground. And if he can just take another step forward and develop, now I get that's what we said from Anthony Richardson, right, this year. Oh, he just needs to take a step forward. He needs to develop. Guess who's in the Alabama system, though? It's not Anthony Richardson. It's Jalen Milroe. He is in a perfect opportunity where he's going to have 5-star weapons. He's going to have an offensive line and a coach that's hell-bent on making that program competitive again, because them dropping out of contention for a national championship this year, you got to think that drives a guy like Saban crazy. So maybe it won't be Milroe next year. I took a cheap shot at him in one of my leagues this season, and I'm going to try to hold on to that until maybe the hype really picks up for him even more. So I'm not saying for the long game, oh yeah, hold him for the next 3 years, never trade him away. Like, you can trade him away at some point once he gains value, but I think that he has a better shot at getting this job than maybe some people would like to believe.
One caveat I would say here is that Anthony Richardson just played Texas A&M and actually looked decent. And that's the first time he's probably looked decent this entire year. So maybe there's just something going on there where they can't deal with the rushing QBs or something. I don't know. Now he didn't like complete as many passes, but once again, it's Anthony Richardson. We wouldn't expect him to. But I do liken him to a smaller version of Anthony Richardson, but I will give him credit. Like, he did complete 63% of his passes in that game against Texas A&M. Now, of course, he completed 44% of his passes the previous week. So, not not anything to write home about. But at the same time, it's only a couple of games. We can't like take too much away from it. It's just in a small sample. I saw what I don't like to see, which is a not very accurate passer, not very like prolific passer, and just somebody that like looks to run. And while I love rushing QBs, I love QBs with athleticism. I want them to be able to throw the ball, and he's just not there yet. And yet, people, like in Devy leagues and C2C leagues, you're gonna have to make a decision about like, do I want him on my team? Do I want to pay for him? Do I want to trade him away? Do I want to trade for him? Or do I want to draft him, next year in a new one, like that kind of thing. So you kind of have to make up your mind now. And if I'm making up my mind now, I'm out. And I'm just going to hope that it's Ty Simpson or that they bring someone else in, or whatever it might be. I haven't even heard much about Ty and like if like how the team really feels about him and all that kind of stuff. So maybe that's like leaning to your concern, but or lending to your concern, I should say. But I think that. Like I said, I'm just at this point. I feel like you have to either be all in or all out, and I'm all out.
Yeah, and I do see a little bit more room to be in between on that. For example, I would say I'm more in between, but since you're out, I'm more in than you. That's why he's a good player to debate here. I will kind of just end with Jalen Hurts, starter for Alabama, 2016-2017. You know what his completion percentage ratings were? 62% and 60%. Jalen Hurts, who's maybe the dynasty QB1 for some people, not me, but some people, he's in that tier 1 of all guys. We saw him develop. Of course, it took, 4 years of college and going to Oklahoma to really start to refine his passing abilities. And he even started off slow at the NFL level. But we know that these types of guys make these big leaps and improvements. And if he has the physical tools, which I think Jalen Milroe does have, he at least has a shot. So high probability, no, not necessarily, but there's potentially that upside there.
All right, you're kind of convincing me here, so I'll give you one here. I'm not all out. I'm not loving it, but he definitely has room to grow and time for that to happen. Now this is where we're gonna be fighting. Because this is my boy, this is my baby from the time that I drafted him, the time that I saw the first picture. My baby boy, Audric Estime. I saw that picture. I sent it to you, and I said, "This is who I want on my team. This is gonna be a stud." And you were like, "I don't know about all that. Like, yeah, he's big, he's quick and whatever." I didn't even look at his stats then. Then I went and looked at his high school stats. I'm like, holy crap, this dude was rushing for like 2,000 yards a season. Like, well, how are you not in on him? And you're like, oh man, let me tell you about this boy, Logan Diggs. He's gonna rule the world. And I was just like, really, Logan Diggs? And then it's been the Audric Estime show in Notre Dame. Ranked Notre Dame, even without Tyler Buckner, like doing much better than people probably gave him credit for at the beginning of the season when things looked so terrible. And while it was a slow start for Estime, he's like, I don't want to say completely taken over because they definitely use the other running backs there with Diggs and Tyree, but man, he sure seems like he's the lead back, and even if it is a 3-back committee, and he's actually doing pretty damn well. Like, I mean, it's even to the point where I've started him for a couple of weeks in my C2C league because he's putting up pretty damn good numbers. So why do you hate Audric Estime so much, and why are you not willing to admit that he's the best running back on that team?
Well, John, I got to fact check you here because you go back the last 3-4 weeks, and it's a complete even slate between Audric Estime and Logan Diggs as far as carries and workload goes. In fact, one of those games, I think it was like 4 or 5 games ago, Audric Estime fumbled, I think, twice, and he got benched. It was Diggs, workhorse guy, the rest of the game. And since they're splitting carries now that Logan Diggs is finally healthy, like I was saying all off season, it's like the guy's coming off shoulder surgery. We shouldn't expect him to like take Audric Estime's job right away, right? It's gonna take a while. And I actually think I'll see this. I don't think Audric Estime is going away. He is such a beast as far as like scoring touchdowns go, which is huge. And I think he is like the higher level of play version of Dwayne McBride, for example. a guy who's not really going to have a receiving upside, but kind of this bigger back, enough burst to him, but he's not a speedy guy, but he's got enough burst for a big back. I think he's going to be a fine player, but to really make a difference at the next level, or even for C2C leagues, you got to have the lion's share of touches and hopefully maybe a little bit of receiving upside. And if not that, you got to really dominate the touches and carries. So I'm not seeing that with the complete split right now going on at Notre Dame. I think Diggs is a good player. I get Audric Estime was a good recruit, very productive in high school. He's been a productive rusher this year, but some of his fantasy football production has or his scoring output has been from 9 touchdowns this season on the ground. And while that's a good measure, I shouldn't be knocking guys for scoring touchdowns, right? If he has a more specialized role as a goal line back, the NFL is not going to be that wowed. He really needs to take over. So is it in his range of outcomes to take over if Diggs has an injury or somehow kind of stops playing for that team? Sure. But I don't see that happening. I think it's going to continue to be a split, and Estime is going to be one of those maybe really late round type of running backs drafted if I had to project that out. Again, not a receiving threat, and he's not an athletic freak like a Jonathan Taylor, a King Henry, maybe more like an A.J. Dillon, which I guess is not a bad comp and not a bad player altogether, but that's kind of where I see him at, and I think A.J. Dillon's probably even higher side, and A.J. Dillon was kind of a workhorse, and Estime is not quite that yet, even though he's been scoring okay.
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you a little bit of credit there, but I mean, they've been kind of going back and forth. I was looking at the game logs, it's like 1 week Estime outproduces him, like per touch, and then vice versa. So I guess the story's not finished, right, being written yet, but at the same time, I think it's more just a player that, like, I don't want to say came from nowhere or anything like that, but like clearly I got him in like the 40th round of our C2C or campus league. Like clearly no one was in on this guy, and so I think that lends to me like caring more about him actually like moving up the ranks. And it's kind of like what I was talking about with Brooks, not to the same extent, but all of a sudden I start noticing him in the ranks of the model, and it's like, well, he wasn't even close to being in there before, and now all of a sudden I'm starting to see things like, you talked about the touchdowns, but he has 1.1 PPR points per touch. Like that's something that I like to see. I like to see you above that 1.0 level. And the fact that he's not even catching passes, means even more when you have when you're over that 1.1, because that starts to show that you're a very good or at least an efficient rusher. And then obviously the touchdowns help with that. The scrim yards per game are getting up there around 80. Like he's been closer to like the 100, 120, like that kind of thing more recently. But I will give you a little bit of credit. Like it doesn't maybe he's not much of an athlete or as much of an athlete because he's a pretty bigger back and everything. He only has a 5% big time run rate, so it seems like he's not breaking off those huge plays or anything like that. And me, like I love the big time run rate. Like I really like to see it over, like a 7, 8, 9%, something like that. And it doesn't sound like a huge difference when you're only talking about a couple percentage points, but it really is. Like it's an easy way to look at somebody that's going to be like prolific and just amazing, and then like somebody that's going to be good and could still be a very good player in the NFL. So as of right now, he's not showing that he's going to be like top tier, kind of guy, which I don't have him as top tier in the model, but I love the fact that he's moving up. He is getting a lot of run in that offense. And, but to your point, like Diggs is definitely not going away, it seems. So I would have loved to have seen him run away with the job, and it doesn't seem like he's quite doing that right now.
Yeah. And like you said, as far as big time run rate, or I looked at explosive or breakaway rushes, Estime has 6 on the year. I mean, Diggs has 7. Diggs has not been playing as much except recently. He's been playing a lot more. So I don't know. I came into this thinking that we were going to discuss Devin Neal a little bit. It realizes we are closer to each other as far as how we feel about Devin Neal, running back for Kansas. However, Devin Neal, even he has 12 breakaway rushes, so he has twice the amount of Estime, for example. And Neal doesn't even have this great like yards per carry this season. It's just kind of telling to me that Estime doesn't quite have that next level acceleration and then top end speed. But anyways, that seemed like a pretty good argument back and forth on estimate for us.
Yeah, and we were talking about Neil, and like he had that huge game this past week, and so of course he jumped back up because he had kind of been falling off. I want to say he'd been averaging like 40 yards a game or something the past few games, if I remember correctly. Because I looked at it when you said you brought him up earlier, and you're like, well, what how do you feel about Neil? And I was like, oh, he sucks. And then I looked at it, and I'm like, oh, of course, he had a 230-yard game this past week. Like, of course he did. And so, like, he jumps back up. Not to say, like, he skyrocketed because, like, one game isn't going to change that much. But we've talked about it in the past where in the model, like, I build in these, like, thresholds and things where, like, I want a player to hit certain game thresholds or attempt thresholds or whatever before I, jump them up the ranks too much. Estime has only played 9 games this season, and so like I don't think he played anything last year if I remember correctly, but he hasn't quite met that threshold, whereas Neil has hit 20 games, and so like I built it into where it's like a pretty big difference. So even though they're kind of far apart right now, I don't even know once I change that. Actually, I can do it right now. See where he moves up. If he moves up close to where Neil is. Let's see real quick here. So 850. So he would be about 6 spots behind Neil if I gave him the same amount of games played. Obviously, he doesn't have that, but not that far apart. But it is kind of tough for me to say that Devin Neal sucks and then love me some Estime. So that's fair.
Yeah, everything needs some context, I suppose, right? I had Devin Neal on my bench, and Eric Gray on my bench, and Caleb Johnson, and Torrey Horton, and Dorian Thompson-Robinson in one league this week. I mean, I had like 260-some points on my bench. And I had a lot of buys and injuries and true freshmen and stuff. So, like, just...
How does that even happen?
I don't know, but I still put up 260-some for my starting lineup. Oof. So... I had a good week last week, but it did suck to see what's his name, Devin Neal put up a 40-plus point game on my bench for sure.
Yeah, I bet that would hurt. Speaking of 40 points, Jaden Daniels got me 40 points, or at least close to it this past week, and he actually helped me quite a bit because I said I was struggling with my QBs, and it didn't look all that great in the beginning of the game. But, he was playing Alabama. But towards the end of the game, he had, I think, like 36, 37 points, whatever it ended up being. Now, it kind of helped that they went to overtime and he scored there and all that kind of stuff. But he actually looked pretty damn good in this game. Now, I believe that, you've talked about in the past how you started out as a Jaden Daniels truther, in his freshman year, but then you kind of fell off after that. I've been probably one of the biggest proponents for Jaden Daniels, if not the biggest proponent for Daniels here for, at least 2 years now. I mean, I remember talking about him on one of our first Devy Devotional pods, saying how much I liked this guy. He was in my top 5 at the time and like all this other stuff. He fell down from there, and he's not quite, there. We haven't seen, especially in the beginning of this season, we haven't seen exactly what I wanted to see. But more recently, he's starting to get 60, 70%, completion rate, a lot of rushing, like once again, we love to see the rushing, but when you combine those two, and he was being pretty safe with the ball as well. And so, when you combine those 3 things, that's where I start going, okay, this guy can be an NFL prospect or an NFL QB. And we've talked about it a little bit, but you have some concerns with why you think that he might not be. But when you start seeing games like beating Alabama and stuff like that, does that pique your interest again? You were a believer. Is it possible to bring you back in here?
You want to see if you can rekindle that flame, huh? Anyways, it very much reminds me of a Devin Achane type of deal. So Devin Achane coming into college, I was like, man, this guy, he has some unreal athleticism. And he's in a running back room with Spiller, where I still thought that, Achane was probably the better back, at least more explosive back. And then we saw him not put on weight. And even now he's putting on a little bit of weight, but Devin Chain is just so small. He's not going to be 200 plus pounds and at least maintain that athleticism that we really covet. I'm concerned that Jaden Daniels, starting off from high school at 175, I guess I don't know why that wasn't more of a concern to me initially. I probably should have never been on him, but he's actually outperformed what I expected for him bulking up. I never thought he'd get to 205 pounds, but that's what he's listed at. I don't know if I trust it, to be honest. He still looks like a skinny dude out there. And
that's true. He does look very skinny, but I mean, he's tall. He has a biggish frame. I mean, not like giant, like where you think he's going to be 240 all of a sudden or anything, but like big enough and tall enough to where I don't think it'd be that insane to think that he could be like 210, 215 one day.
Right. I mean, I could see it. I mean, that's 35 pounds. That's a lot. In like 4 years, I guess it'd be 5 by next year, right? By the time he's actually in the NFL. It's possible, right? It's possible for him to put another 10 pounds on within the next year, but when he's already done so much, is he starting to maximize what his potential is? Because you have to think about it maybe from like a anatomy and physiology standpoint as well. Of sometimes, for example, myself, I'm not a big guy. If I was never going to put on just a ton of muscle naturally, that just was not something that was in the cards for my physiology, my build, all that. Jaden Daniels, he might kind of be limited. I don't expect him to become this super jacked guy, 215. Like, we shall see. But I guess another concern is just what he's done in his career hasn't quite matched up hype-wise with what we'd expect. So they had a great win, but it was at home at LSU's very notoriously difficult stadium to play in. I mean, Death Valley's intimidating for anybody, especially an Alabama team who's not at its best, right? This is not their year. I have to say, he was impressive in that game. He was making runs. He was making all sorts of good decisions and throws that really make you want to reel him back in, make you want to buy into him at least at some level. But do I think he's going to be a day one draft capital quarterback? No. Is there a route for him getting success at the NFL? Potentially, but not a round one guy, in my opinion. I really don't see it. At least I'm not confident in it. And that's why I'm just saying, I think I got to fade him. I think he's going to be maybe a round 3, maybe a day 3 type of player.
And I cannot argue with you. I don't really think he's going to be a day 1 guy or, a first round guy. But at the same time, like We've heard, people freaking out about Malik Willis last year. People are freaking out about Anthony Richardson. If you take away the size concerns, which I guess you can't, but like if you take away those size concerns, like why wouldn't you want Jaden Daniels over those guys? And if you're trying to push somebody into the first round, you would think it would be somebody like Jaden Daniels. And in the SEC, now he hasn't thrown that much. He only has 268 pass attempts this year. But in the SEC, going up against Bama and Georgia and whoever else, 69.8% completion rate this year, 8.3 adjusted yards per attempt, 14 passing touchdowns. I believe he has 10 rushing touchdowns and 1 interception. So, I mean, those are pretty decent numbers in the SEC. He's not a prolific passer by any means, but like it just. Once again, I think if you were going to give somebody that Jalen Hurts treatment, the second round QB that all of a sudden becomes a stud, take away the size concerns, and I think if you just look at what he's actually done, I could easily see him being a second round pick, or hopefully worst case scenario a third round pick for a team, and just like. He gets his shot like a Malik Willis this year. He's gotten his shot. Now Malik Willis is terrible. But I think if Jaden Daniels were to get his shot, he could actually say, hey, look at me. I'm actually pretty damn good here.
He could. And maybe it's just me looking at, like, the top 25, right? The top ranked teams in college football. And I don't think that LSU is going to crack the top 4. It makes sense with Georgia, Ohio State, Michigan, TCU, Tennessee, Oregon, USC, all those teams having 0 or 1 losses versus LSU's got 2 losses. I don't see them maybe getting that quite on that pedestal or that notoriety that comes with those top 4 games in the college football playoffs. So maybe that's an issue there. Let's see. And he says, let's see him make a big-time throw to some of those wide receivers. I was told LSU had a generational talent at wide receiver, winky face. Love it. John is muted, I believe, but...
Crap, I was muted. Thank you for reminding me. That's my co-host from the Full Tilt Devy pod there, and giving me some crap because I've been talking about Jaden Daniels from basically the beginning, and obviously, like, people love some Keyshawn Boutte. We've talked about Malik Neighbors, and it hasn't been exactly what I would want to see from either one of those players, but. Like I said, he's not throwing a lot, but he's throwing, when he does throw, he's making it count, and I think that counts, or matters almost as much as anything else. But he's not going to be a first round pick. I don't think so, unless he just goes out there. Now I will say, I think he's probably the closest thing to, like, athletically to Justin Fields. And we saw what Justin Fields did this past week, 178 rushing yards. Like, just doesn't matter how well he throws or anything like that. Like, when you're that good, when you can run that well, you can win games, or at least be in games. And so, like, I feel like he's that close, because when I see him running on the field, it doesn't seem like anyone could possibly touch him. And there's not too many players that I see that from, besides the Justin Fields. Even like Lamar's just different. Like, Lamar rushing isn't quite like that. Like, people can catch him. People, it's just more like, I don't know if he has a vision thing or whatever. Like, he's very good at running, obviously. But when you see Fields, or even maybe to a lesser extent Kyler Murray, when you see either one of them, you're just like, they're gone. Like, there's no one's going to catch them. They are just absolutely gone. And that's how I feel with Jaden Daniels as well.
That was my comp for Jaden Daniels coming out, was Kyler Murray.
Ooh.
And yeah, so I did like it. I just don't know that he's quite as jitterbug fast, if you know what I'm saying. But
he's also not 5'11", so.
Yeah, right. Maybe it's just a visual perception of how fast Kyler's legs are moving, right? But at the end of the day, Jaden Daniels, yes, he has some similarities to Justin Fields, but Justin Fields is doing it at 30 more pounds at the NFL level. That's insane. Fields is a freak, and we should not have been fading him. I'm so glad nobody in Lord of the Rings 2 wanted to trade for my Fields when I was putting him on the block at one point. Thank you guys for allowing me to make the right decision and holding on to Fields. Jaden Daniels is not that, but maybe he will put on some weight. We'll have to see.
All right, enough about Jaden Daniels. We will have to wait and see what happens there. Was there anyone else that we wanted to talk about before we get out of here? We've had some good grudges. We've come to terms. We've agreed. We've disagreed. We've done everything in between there. You got anything else?
I mean, do we want to get into like a Luther Burden or Caleb Williams?
Ooh, I actually forgot about Caleb Williams. Yeah, and Luther Burden. All right, so Luther Burden's just terrible, right?
He was one of my tier 1 wide receivers coming into this year. I'm not ready to call him terrible. I'll say that he's not still the wide receiver 1 for me in the class, but I have him a lot higher than you based on our conversation earlier, and that's fine, right? I mean, especially when you're using your model, which very heavily wants to know the production. But can't forget that Luther Burden's a 5-star. He's built like A.J. Brown out there. And Missouri's just completely fudging this up as far as how they're using him, what sorts of situations they're putting him into. And Luther Burden's getting outperformed out there on his own team, which sucks. But a couple different things. He is a true freshman. He's banged up. So even now, do I believe he's fully healthy? No. There was talks that he'd be done for the year, and he's back already. So, I mean, that in itself is kind of impressive. They're using him in this weird role where, I mean, he has all these rushing attempts and just like screens and weird passes that are very short. And of course, he's not going to have a great yards per reception. It's 8.2. That's yucky. But, I mean, 30 receptions for the year. It's clear that they want to get him the ball. They just don't know how to do it because they don't know how to play offense. Sorry for the Mizzou fans out there listening to the podcast. It's really not personal.
Get bodied.
Yeah, I mean, Luther Burden, he might be gone. He might go to Alabama and outproduce Ja'Cory Brooks 2 for 1 as far as taking out John's guy and then elevating
Oh
Burden.
no.
No, I'm just kidding. But that would be really fun, right? I mean, I think that Luther Burden does everything that Kobe Prentice does, but he does it better, and he's much bigger and better recruits. So that I'm sad. I like Kobe Prentice, but for Luther Burden's sake, let's hope he gets somewhere else that can really highlight and utilize him down the field a little bit more, because we've seen those couple of flashes where he puts on the Jets, and he's a fast kid too. He's this yards per reception deal. That's not indicative of how athletic he actually is. So he's one of those ones where I can't really trust the statistics that he's putting out at this time. Now, if that doesn't change, let's say next year, we really have to move him down, right? He needs to at least show more big playability more consistently. But at this point, I'm not putting it on the kid. I still think Luther Burden is a tier 1 wide receiver in the 2025 class.
And so saying that he sucks was a little hyperbolic, but I think that I think you have to move him down, which you said you did, and now you still have him in the tier 1. I guess I don't hate it. We've seen a lot of guys, especially I've done a lot of research on all these, trying to figure out what stats matter and all that kind of stuff, and I've seen a lot of times. And obviously, I always come back to like a Jameson Williams or something where somebody just did nothing for like a year or two, and then all of a sudden, like they're just studs. So it's not impossible for him to all of a sudden become better. The biggest thing for me is his teammate. Like we've talked about how Mizzou's not the greatest offense, but his teammate is actually standing out in the model, and it's somebody that I knew really nothing about going into the season, honestly, and that's probably my fault or my problem. But I definitely know who he is now, and that's Dominic Lovett, and he showed up in the model maybe 3-4 weeks into the season, and I was like, oh, who the hell is this? I started looking it up. I'm like, wait, he's on Mizzou, like. Everyone wants Luther Burden to be like, so I'm like, oh, so he's like a senior or something. Like, no, he's a sophomore. He's a true sophomore. And so, he's only 1 year ahead, and yet he's doubling and tripling all of Luther Burden's numbers. And so when you see that, I can't blame the offense because we have a guy that's standing out in the offense. It's just not Luther Burden. Now, you can call it bad coaching, like saying that he's in the wrong role, and I'm not going to argue with you on that. But I'm seeing like almost 3 yards per team pass attempt for Dominic Lovett, and I'm seeing like 1 yard per team pass attempt for Luther Burden. And now I have rushing in the model because I had to build it in for players like a Wandale Robinson last year and like stuff like that. Like I had to be able to see, are they just... Are they used the wrong way or a different way? Maybe not the wrong way, but a different way. But they're still standing out. They're still scoring points. They're still, very productive for their team. And so I have rushing in the wide receiver model. So if he's running instead of catching balls, he's still going to stand out. And he is not standing out. He's not even in the top 100. And freshmen in my model get huge bumps because I don't expect them to do all that much. But I'm seeing 650 receiving yards from Lovett, 14.2 yards per reception. You said like 8 or something like that for Luther Burden earlier. Like I said, almost 3 yards per team pass attempt, 72 receiving yards per game, a 36% market share in the offense. Like maybe it's not that Burden's bad, maybe it's just that Lovett's really good. But I'm falling in love with Lovett, and I'm all out on Burden at this point.
Yeah, and it's too bad how they are using him, because you look back at high school production, and I get it, it's high school. Most of the good players put up great stats, but I mean, Luther Burden truly dominated, and he averaged over 18 yards per reception his last 2 years in high school. It's not like the guy was just always a guy who's just ripping off little chunks. He was a big play machine. He proved that at, I think it was one of the big all-star games for high school seniors coming out this last spring. It was super impressive. I mean, the guy was ripping off huge plays and showing that he was one of the most explosive ones on the field. So I don't know if it's injury related and system, but I'm not willing to give up on that talent. I have to say, screw the production on this one. There's just too many other confounding factors that are muddying the waters. I like what Lovett's done. It's not a knock on him. It's just let's not give up on Burden, or at least I'm not going to yet. I'm still going to have him high, even though I did trade him away in one CDC league. So know that this isn't even bias. This isn't even me trying to talk up one of my own players because I don't have any Luther Burden anymore. And it hurts. It really does. But those are my thoughts there.
Speaking of completely unbiased, Drake May. I've never really talked about him. I don't think not much of a fan or anything like no. So recently, I talked about on the Full Tilt Devy podcast that Andy is on. I talked about how I moved Drake May above Caleb Williams in the 2024 class. I actually moved Drake May up to my QB1 overall. In Devy and above CJ Stroud, above Bryce Young, and I know it's spicy. I know it's crazy. I know people don't don't want to hear it, and they're probably calling me insane. Although I have heard quite a few people since then, or seen posts. I've seen a lot of people talking about how they're moving May up, maybe not to 1 like me, but like moving them up all of a sudden, like they're falling in love. I've seen posts that I've sent to Aaron talking about how he's the first QB to score 30 touchdowns in their first 9 games in I think it was college football history or something like that. It was whatever it was. It was a great feat. I love me some Drake May, but that created the argument for wait. You have him over Caleb Williams? I'm like, well, yeah, of course. And I've heard obviously takes from Aaron. I've heard takes from a lot of other Devy analysts and C2C analysts, and that seems like a pretty spicy take. But I mean, I'll let Aaron get into why he loves him so much, and then I'll completely tear him down after that. So I'm not going to get into the numbers and all that kind of stuff just yet. But I think when you look at what Drake May has done in his first year, we just got done talking about Luther Burden, just getting on the field and all that kind of stuff. Well, this is May's first year as an actual player and, in the offense and everything as well. And yet he's just done everything you would possibly ever want to see from a QB. And I love me some Williams. This is not me saying I hate, Caleb Williams or anything like that. I really like Caleb Williams. I just don't have him quite in that same tier. And I think that's when you start getting Aaron's goat there.
Right. I don't want this to turn into a straw man argument of different takes of, who likes this player, who doesn't like it. The simple fact right now is that you have Drake May in tier 1 and you have Caleb Williams in tier 2. And that's where the disagreement and the debate starts and ends, or not ends, but that's why I think he's a good one for us to talk about. Just because Drake May is blowing everybody out of the water statistically this season, and I have to give John a lot of credit. He was one of the first ones on May out there, and he never kind of wavered from that. He didn't buy into the coach speak and what they were giving practice reps to Jacoby Priswell. John never bought into that. Though there was just a lot of uncertainty with May. Let's not make this a May type of conversation ultimately. May's been great. But if we're looking at what Caleb Williams has done, we need to also appreciate that that's special, both because he's a great receiving threat, but also because he's a great passer. Though his completion percentages are not elite by any means, he's been solidly at 64% the last 2 years. So his true freshman year thrown into the mix, and this year. And that's with poor offensive line play and an underperforming offense last year. To be clear, poor offensive line play coming into this season, and then Oklahoma last year was a mess, and he still was very consistent with 21 touchdowns and only 4 interceptions as a true freshman. And guess what Caleb Williams is doing this year? I mean, he's 28 touchdowns to 1 interception. So I don't really care about the completion percentage being a little bit lower. It's not like he's throwing all these picks because he's inaccurate. Yes, he does have, I told John, he has some issues as far as when he's on the run, he's trying to throw across his body or kind of make these quick decision throws down the field. He's not always the most accurate. So I think that there's some areas that May is better at, and I think that's showing up statistically. But that does not mean that Caleb Williams is not a baller deserving of being in that tier 1. It's rare that we get guys who are that consistent on the ground and in the air. I mean, if you add that up, I don't even know what that is. Like in his career, Caleb Williams has 49 touchdowns and only 5 interceptions. That's insane. So I think he deserves to be in that same top tier. He has enough size to him. He has the pedigree. He's going to have 3 years of really good production. Drake May, he deservedly is a good player. So I don't want this to turn into a different argument than what it needs to be. Caleb Williams, tier 1. Let's make it happen, people.
To be fair, he's very, very close to being in tier 1. He's just not quite there. And honestly, it's just he's not a prolific passer right now. Like, he's in the Pac-12, and he's passing wise, he's not that far off from Jaden Daniels. So like, and Jaden Daniels has a lot more rushing than him this year. So now he has a lot more touchdowns than Jaden Daniels. So I'm not trying to hate on the guy. And to your credit, he's very safe with the ball. Now that wasn't always the case, but he has turned like I think he started out like his first couple games. Of course, we're going to give him a little credit there, but like his first few games, I think he had like a 3% interception rate or something, and I was like, this isn't looking good. And then since then. Not this year, I meant last year. And since then, he's just completely, like, not turned it around, but, like, just cleaned everything up. And he has that 1% interception rate that I love to see, that all of the top guys have. Drake May, CJ Stroud's at 1.4, but I'm not going to, like, sit here and nitpick, 0.4%. Bryce Young, 1.1. Caleb Williams, 1.0. Hendon Hooker, 1.0 as well. But, like, those are the kind of things that I love to see. Now, I know a lot of people argue about like yards per carry and that kind of thing, but Caleb Williams is right up at 6.1 yards per carry. I think in the college level for QBs, like I like looking at yards per carry. It's just a simple stat that I can say, is this guy good at rushing or is he not? And he's up there at 6.1 yards per carry. Drake May, 6.3 yards per carry. So like I love to see that. And like that's something that, but and obviously Bryce Young's up there as well. I'm just trying to look at like the top tier guys. The biggest thing, and you said the completion rate. I'm not knocking him much for the completion rate. Like, yeah, it's not 70% or 68% or whatever. 64%. Like, it doesn't get a huge knock in the model. It's the slightest of knock, and that might be the difference, honestly, when it's all said and done, of why he's not in that tier 1 just yet. But I think the biggest thing for me is when you look at, once again, looking at the top tier, Drake May for adjusted yards per attempt, 10.9, CJ Stroud, 11.4, Bryce Young, 10.8, Caleb Williams, 10.3. Caleb Williams is in the Pac-12. These other players are not. And so I just want to see a little bit more from a Pac-12 player than I would from a different, conference. And I think that's where the disconnect is of why I don't quite have him in that tier 1, even though everything looks great. But when you're going up against Pac-12 defenses, I want you to be elite. And he's very good. And so that's why I have him in literally his own tier. As of right now, at least. I have the top 3, May, Stroud, Young, and then he's in his own tier by himself. And then I have the guys like Hendon Hooker, the Jaden Daniels, Grayson McCall, like those kind of guys. I think you should be happy enough that I at least have him in his own tier, right?
No, man, the disrespect is unreal. No, I'm just kidding. But I think that you made a lot of good points as far as, Pac-12, he should be doing more. But if you look at recent games, now I need to do a more thorough analysis of game-by-game production. I do think that they're allowing him to throw more, and he's doing that without Jordan Addison, without Mario Williams the last 2 games. Jordan Addison's been banged up even before the last 2 games he's missed. So, like, that's really impressive. And
Taj Washington looking good, though.
Oh, yeah. And Taj Washington's fine. Right, he was pretty solid coming from, Memphis, right? But I'm not so sold that he has, like, these elite weapons that Lincoln Riley just wants to air it out. Like, they're running Travis Dye a lot. And could you extrapolate or could you guess, is that a reflection on Caleb Williams? I don't know. Maybe it's just a reflection on how the coaches want to play the game, I guess, ultimately. We really don't know that, and we can't infer too much information there. Caleb Williams, if he was in more shootouts like Drake May was, maybe he would throw for more yards, because you have to realize the UNC defense is atrocious, and the UNC opponents that they've been playing aren't good either. So it's not, again, a knock on May, but it's just showing the context of why May is producing so much. It's like he has to. Versus USC, I mean, yes, their defense hasn't been good either, but for whatever reason, the coaching staff is very content at just running the ball, which UNC, I mean, their running game's been very inconsistent. It's all on Drake May passing to his number one threat, Josh Downs, and then now whoever else, Antoine Green and whatnot there. So, again, that's why I think that Caleb Williams, he could be even doing more right now. If you look at the skill sets, I say same tier there. Maybe we'll have to have people vote on Twitter, something like that. But no, I think good arguments either way on that. I'm glad we ended on Caleb Williams. It's kind of a big name guy, but still good one to discuss.
Yeah, and I think when it's all said and done, he's going to end up a first-round pick, and like none of this is really going to matter because even though he's not technically tier 1 right now, A, he'll probably move up into it eventually, and B, like if he's a first-round pick, when you're at this level, then I care, like that kind of thing. So now if you're at Malik Willis's level and you're a first-round pick, I do not care. Like you're still not good. But when you're Caleb Williams level, like, yeah, I'm listening. So it's probably all going to be moot, but I think it's more to a lot of people still aren't giving Drake May, the love that he deserves and that kind of the respect he deserves. And I'm starting to believe that he can truly be a first-round pick, in the next draft. And that always wasn't the belief for a lot of people.
Right, and even the way you phrase that, though, he could be a first-round pick, where it seems like Caleb Williams, he's almost a lock at this point, right? As far as people that I've heard scouting wise, but then again, Twitter scouts, that's more questionable, right? So I guess
they also said the same thing about a couple of the players last year too, right?
Yeah, exactly. So we shall see time wise. You're probably right. They both end up in the same tier. And guess what? We're allowed to change our takes later in time. So I'll understand when you change Caleb Williams to tier 1, John. That'll be a great day.
If he can just get up to, I want to see where I have the threshold. All right, if he can get up to 66% completion rate, I think he'll automatically jump into the tier 1. So you think he can, Jordan Addison comes back and he can just get a little bit better maybe?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, the last 3 games, it's like 381 yards, 411, 360s, and that's without his best weapon. So hopefully when he gets him back, they'll start continuing on that, upward trend scoring wise, but we shall see. I don't know if he's ever going to be one of those guys who's super, super high completion percentage wise, but hey, if Jalen Hurts can do that, after 3 years of not being a very good passer, Caleb Williams could eventually do that too, right? These guys do develop throughout their career. He's still very young, true sophomore, so there's time for sure.
Absolutely. I cannot wait to see what him and May do for the rest of the season and then going into next year. It'll be a lot of fun, and I can't wait to talk about that 2024 class with you and everything else. But we have a lot of 2023 talks before that, so let's not get too ahead of ourselves like some people on Twitter are starting to do. Like it's like they're bored and they're like, oh, nope, we got to start talking about 2024 now.
But reminders to people out there, do trade for those 2024 picks if, contenders around this time of year are wanting to sell. Now, that's advice in dynasty leagues. In Devy depleted or, C2C, that's a totally different game. But honestly, in dynasty, those 2024 picks are pretty hot. Just had our buddy Crescent try to snake one away from me.
Did he?
No, I'm just kidding. He did have an interesting offer. But we won't get into that today. Buy those 2024 picks if they're cheap anywhere.
Absolutely. Well, this was a lot of fun. We didn't exactly know what we were doing at the beginning of the day, but we knew we needed to do a pod, and Aaron came up with a great idea, I think, and it was a lot of fun talking about some of these players that we don't fully agree on, and I can't wait to see how right I am, but I appreciate you, Aaron. This is, like I said, a lot of fun. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Aaron, do you have any final words of wisdom before we get out of here?
No. I mean, that was a lot of words of wisdom there, so that's all I got for the day.
All right. Yeah, he's done. He's pooped. But we're going to go ahead and get out of here. We will see you guys next time. But for now, we're cashing out. See ya.